The border guard behind the nearest desk looked up from his magazine and motioned us to the long table in the center of the room. "Back again, Mr. Easton." "That's right." The border guard tapped the table. "Bags up here." We put our bags out for him to inspect. He was looking for any harmful items containing electricity. Both Timothy and I knew how to pack when going into the East. Most of what we had in our bags were things manufactured in the land beyond the red zone in the first place. The minor exceptions for me were photographs, some jewelry, and lastly, my makeup. After 3 years wearing the stuff, I could hardly go cold turkey, could I? Besides, the way things were looking, it was very doubtful I'd be back to Ottleton any time soon to buy more. The rest of the things in my bags were mostly dresses, sadly wrinkled, a sarcenet coat, gloves, and a straw bonnet that needed steaming, plus a new lining. Nothing like the cropped jeans, striped knit shirt, and metro jacket that I was wearing right now. The border guard picked up my blush and mascara and shook his head. "Sorry, plastic items are strictly prohibited. We'll have to keep these." I gave a little gasp. "What nonsense! I've taken my makeup with me through the Queen Island station, and they never said a word." "New restrictions on plastic. Sorry, miss," he said, and dropped my precious champagne foundation into the basket beside him. I stared in dismay, but he continued to drawl conversationally. "Heading to Easton, I assume," he said as he swished his hands through my chemises. "Correct," Timothy said. "And the young lady, too?" "Yes, me too," I answered petulantly, still eyeing his basket. He eyed us for a moment before asking, "Business or pleasure?" "Business," Timothy said. "I'm just going home," I said. "Are you sure I couldn't take the little tube with me? It was very expensive." He ignored my question, but looked me up and down. "You say you're from the country? Hard to tell with those clothes. You might want to change before you get too deep down the road because the roughnecks tend to leave the natives alone. Are you carrying any fruits or vegetables?" He continued to open our bags and examine the contents. "Any alcohol or drugs, firearms, phones, digital watches, batteries, or computerized devices?" The guard remained neutral about most of the things he saw in our baggage until he came to the wooden box. He tried to open it, but it was locked. "What's in here?" I looked at Timothy, waiting for his answer. "Valuables," Timothy replied. "I'll need you to open that up," the guard said, scooting the box towards Timothy. "Can't. The key is in Easton." The man shook his head. "I can't let you take this with you without seeing the contents of the box first." Timothy reached into his pocket and pulled out a bill with a very large number printed in the corner. He slid it toward the guard. "Try this key. It sometimes works." The guard nodded. "Works for me." He reached out to take the money, but I shot my hand out and rested it on the bill in Timothy's hand. Looking up at him, I said anxiously, "And does it work for the makeup as well?" With a sigh of resignation, Timothy pulled out one more bill. The guard smiled, took the money, and slid the basket to me. I quickly gathered my precious makeup and shoved it into my bag. The money, meanwhile, disappeared with a practiced hand. "That concludes our business. The last thing I'm required to do is warn you that once you walk through that door," he indicated the exit behind him, "you proceed at your own risk. You may or may not come across the sheriff or his men, but you will certainly run into undesirables. When that happens, we advise that you have something ready to give them in exchange for your safety. Cash sometimes works, but jewels, precious gems, or metallic currency such as gold or silver is your best bet. Good luck." Timothy said to me, "It isn't too late for you to turn back. I'll give you the keys to my car and some cash. You can go back to Ottleton and book yourself a passage on a ship." Even after everything he said, "I'm coming," I said slowly and loudly so that he would understand this time. Before we left, we each changed our clothes in the bathrooms. Timothy came out in leather trousers and a riding coat over a white shirt. I had on my brown Kersey-Moore riding dress. The waistline was sadly low, but I'd had neither time nor reason to rework the dress to match current fashions. To hide this defect, and to keep warm, I wore my gray woolen sweater because I wasn't about to expose my silk coat to the rigors of the road. As for my footwear, I had purchased a decent pair of boots only last week. They were beautiful boots, made of leather and perfect to wear in cold, rough locations. They were also sitting neatly in the back of my closet at Mrs. Haverden's house. I'd forgotten to pack them. I looked down at my sneakers. They looked ridiculously peeking out from underneath my skirt. "Lisbette," Timothy said as I came out of the bathroom, "this is really stupid of you. If my gold runs out before we get home, you could get kidnapped for ransom, or worse, killed." He pulled out his car keys and held them out to me. "Last chance." "Oh, will you stop?" I said, heading to the door. I fumbled with a brass doorknob and pushed the door open. "Wait," he said. He pulled a coat from his bag, much like the frieze one he was wearing, but heavier. "You'd better take this." "My sweater is fine." "It's too Western. I can't afford you calling attention to us by wearing it." I took off my sweater and accepted the coat. "And here, I thought you were being chivalrous." He took the sweater and dropped it into the waste bin beside the door. Handing you the keys to my car was chivalrous. We've now moved on to self-preservation and economics. "You mean," I said as I slid my arms into the voluminous garment, "that it would profit us if I appeared to be a mendicant." "Exactly." The town of Mill Crag was damp and dark. The sun had long since dropped behind the tips of the St. Weldons. The buildings were an odd mix of the old and new world. Cottages and shops grew like mushroom clumps next to mobile homes that had been hauled in from the west. There were rocks everywhere, rocks in piles, rocks in the walls, rocks in the road. Even the roofs were shingled in blue slate stones. I caught sight of the thoroughfare leading from Millcrag, snaking down into the wooded hills where it disappeared into the gloom. Beyond that was nothing but dusky hills and banks of misty canyons. It all looked cold, and I shivered. "Are we staying here for the night?" I asked. "Not even close," Timothy said. "I aim to get in at least 10 miles before we rest tonight. 15 if we can." I turned my back to him so he wouldn't see my eyes widen. 15? I cleared my throat and asked carelessly, "Is there a transport we're taking?" "The livery has horses," he said as he started across the street. Directly opposite the port agency, the livery was the biggest building in town. But like the aging parking garage in the mountain behind us, it had a haggard look to it, as if it had been built with great expectations, only to have been sadly forgotten and unused. The courtyard at the livery was a mucky mess. I let Timothy go first and then tried my best to walk in his deep footprints to save my white shoes. They had been the perfect thing to run around Ottleton this morning, but these mountains were going to be the end of my designer sneakers. The place when we reached it was cavernous and full of shadows. A single lamp had been lit and left on a table, but no one was here wasting money on lighting bills. I could smell the horses long before I could see them. There were at least a dozen animals stalled inside. I walked to the nearest hack and rubbed my chilly hands on her neck and let her nuzzle my cold cheeks. "Hello," Timothy called out. "Carson? Richard?" Nobody answered. The horse was nibbling my hair. I pushed her away so that I could ask, "Who are Carson and Richard?" "Carson is the owner," he answered, walking deeper into the stables. "Find a horse you like while I look for him." "Does that mean that money is no object?" I smiled over my shoulder. I was only half joking. Instead of answering me, he turned a corner and disappeared. It was warm inside the stables, and I took off Timothy's coat and hung it on a peg. Just then I heard footsteps coming from the stairway. I looked up to see a tall man with dark hair. He saw me and paused. Leaning his elbows on the banister, his loose, shiny locks fell over his dark eyes. "Oh, hello, what's a pretty thing like you doing in a place like this?" Like flipping an electric switch, I put Timothy out of my mind. "I was just about to take a look at the horses," I said with an air of helplessness, "but I'm not exactly sure what I'm looking for." He straightened up and continued down the stairs. He was well built, slim, and had broad shoulders. Even in the dim light, I could see in a second that he was from the West, despite the fact that he was dressed in Eastern style. Even if the price tag on his jacket hadn't still been attached to the pocket, he had the far too familiar goatee that had been all the rage this past year in Ottleton. But there was also the distinct air of money about him. I have an eye for money. People with money have an aura of ease about them. Friends of people with money have the same vibe. Poor people, well, they just look tired and anxious all the time. Like gallantry itself, he placed his hand on his chest and said, "I know a thing or two about horses. Allow me to help you." "Oh, would you?" I asked with an added dash of uncertainty that even to my ears sounded convincing. "I'd be delighted, only surely you aren't going anywhere alone, are you?" He was trying to be subtle, but I could see him examining my clothes and trying to decide which side of the border I came from. Then he spotted my shoes and laughed. "A fellow Westerner, eh?" I glanced down at my sneakers. "Pretty obvious, isn't it? I just drove in from Ottleton today. Where are you from?" "The same. But really, you aren't here alone, are you?" "Oh, no, I'm here with a friend. What brings you out here?" "Believe it or not, I'm on my way to a little nowhere-nothing village to deliver a package. Boring stuff, really, but well, duty calls.